Sabina didn't flinch. That was the part Evelina could never shake, not the sight of them together, not the sheets pulled loose, not even Dario's face frozen in shock. It was her sister's eyes, steady, almost curious, like she was watching something unfold that she had already decided wouldn't touch her. Sabina looked at Evelina through that bedroom door and smiled. Not a smile of guilt, not a smile of panic, a smile that said, "I knew you'd find out eventually." Evelina's hand was still on the doorframe. The engagement ring on her left hand caught the light. 3 months away from the wedding. 4 years of loving a man she believed she understood. And her sister, her blood, had chosen that smile. If you have ever been betrayed by the one person you were certain would never hurt you, stay with this story. Because what Evelina did next will either break your heart or save it. If this kind of story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Evelina's journey all the way to the end. You won't want to miss what comes next. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The engagement ring had cost more than most people earned in a year. Evelina knew that because she had been standing next to Dario when he paid for it in cash, folded notes pulled from a plain envelope, the jeweler pretending not to look nervous while he counted. The stone was a cushion-cut diamond, not enormous, not flashy, which was exactly what she had asked for. She had pressed her forehead against his shoulder in the car afterward and really believed that this was a man who listened. 4 years had taught her that much at least. Dario Vescari listened in ways that other men never bothered to. He remembered which perfume she stopped wearing because it gave her headaches. He knew that she hated being spoken for in conversations. When she told him something was important to her, he didn't nod and forget. He wrote it down, literally. A small black notebook he kept in his coat pocket that his lieutenant Raphael used to make jokes about. The boss and his love letters. She had laughed at that once. Standing in the hallway outside his bedroom door, 3 weeks before their wedding, she understood for the first time that she had never really known what was written in that notebook. She had come home early because of Sabina. Her younger sister had sent a text that afternoon. "I think I'm having a panic attack. Can you come?" And Evelina had left the wedding planner mid-sentence, paid the taxi driver double to take the long route around the traffic, and arrived at the estate with her coat still on. She had knocked twice on Dario's bedroom door out of habit, heard nothing that alarmed her, and pushed it open. The light from the window was warm. Late afternoon, the kind that turns everything gold and soft. She would spend years trying to forget what that light looked like. She did not scream. She had always imagined in the abstract way that people imagine catastrophes they believe will never actually happen, that if she ever caught the man she loved being unfaithful, she would lose control completely. She would throw things. She would say every word that came into her head. Instead, something colder took over. She stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds. She knew because she counted them later, replaying the moment at 2 a.m. in a different country, trying to find the exact place where her life cracked in half. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dario didn't see her at first. He was turned toward the window, but Sabina did, and Sabina smiled. Evelina pulled the door closed quietly. Her hand was completely steady. She walked down the long marble hallway toward the front entrance, and halfway there she stopped, stood very still for a moment, and removed the ring from her finger. She had passed a writing desk near the staircase. Dario kept paper there for messages to staff, and she sat down, tore a clean sheet, and wrote 3 words with a pen she found in the drawer. "You lost me." She folded the note around the ring and walked back to the bedroom. She did not open the door again. She simply crouched, slid both under the gap at the bottom, stood up, and walked away. She was through the front gates and into the street before the note had time to settle on the tile floor. She had her own money. That mattered, and she had always been careful about it, not out of distrust, not initially, but because she had watched her mother dissolve into someone else's life completely, and she had promised herself, since she was 19 years old, that no matter who she loved, she would keep something that was entirely hers. A savings account that Dario didn't know about. Not a secret kept out of deception, but out of instinct, the same instinct that had made her keep her own apartment for the first 2 years they were together, even after he asked her twice to move into the estate. She took a taxi to her old apartment. The key still worked. She sat on the floor of the empty bedroom. She had moved most of her furniture to the estate 6 months ago, and she sat there for a long time, without moving. The room smelled like dust and old wood, and something faintly floral from a dried bouquet she'd left on the window ledge. She did not cry. Not yet. She was calculating. Evelina's mind worked that way under pressure. She had learned it during law school, when she had failed her second-year exams, and her father told her maybe translation was a better fit than an actual legal career. And instead of collapsing, she had sat at her desk for 6 hours and built a study plan that got her through retakes with distinction. Emotion was something she processed later, quietly in private. The crisis came first. The feeling waited. So she sat on the floor of her empty apartment and she made a list in her head. What did Dario know about her finances? Her bank account at the regional branch, which she'd opened before they met. Her car, which was in her name. The apartment lease expired. Her worksheet translated legal documents for 3 international firms on a contract basis, all payments direct deposit. What did he know about her habits, her roots, her friends, her family? Her family, Sabina. That was the crack that finally let something through. Not the image of Dario's face, not even the betrayal itself. Sabina's smile, because Sabina had not looked panicked when their eyes met. She had not looked ashamed. She had looked like a person who had been waiting to be caught and was mildly interested in how it would go. "Think I'm having a panic attack. Can you come?" The text had been a lie. An invitation. A stage set carefully so that Evelina would walk onto it. She sat with that for a long time. Then she stood up, splashed cold water on her face from the bathroom tap, looked at herself in the mirror for 30 seconds, and started packing. She left before sunrise. She took 1 bag, 2 changes of clothes, her documents, her cash, her laptop, and a burner phone she bought at an all-night electronics shop. She left her personal phone on the kitchen counter of the apartment, powered off. She withdrew the maximum daily limit from her savings account at an ATM 2 kilometers from the apartment. She would do the same at 2 more machines before the city woke up. She did not call anyone. Not her mother, not her colleagues, not the one close friend who would have asked too many questions she didn't have answers to yet. She had a passport. She had money. She had her mind. She caught a pre-dawn bus to the border crossing. Lisbon was not a choice she planned in advance. It was simply where the first available connection went, and she had enough clarity to recognize that destination mattered less than distance. On the bus, she watched the Italian countryside dissolve into dark shapes outside the window, and she let herself feel it for exactly 90 minutes. She kept her face turned toward the glass so no one would see. The loss of Dario. Not just the man she thought she knew, but the version of the future she had been carrying, the wedding, the family she had imagined, the particular shape of a life she had spent 4 years building toward. Then she folded all of it up and put it somewhere she wouldn't look at again until she could afford to. She arrived in Lisbon with a headache, a stiff back from the journey, and no plan beyond a cheap hostel she found in a guidebook she'd bought at a border town shop. She was 32 years old, and she had walked away from everything. And somewhere in the back of her mind, very quietly, something that felt almost like relief began to breathe. She found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later. She was standing in the narrow bathroom of a small apartment she had rented in the Moraria district, a real apartment this time, not the hostel, because she had already started picking up translation work remotely and had enough for 2 months stuff up front. The test was from a pharmacy 2 streets over. She had bought 3 of them without thinking about why she bought 3, and she took all of them why she bought 3, sitting on all of them one after another, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the window cracked open and the sound of a neighbor's television bleeding through the wall. All 3 said the same thing. She sat very still for a long time. Her hand reached for the burner phone on the sink. She still had Dario's number memorized. She had never needed to write it down. It had simply lodged itself in her brain, the way important things did. She picked up the phone, held it, and then the smile came back. Sabina, through the gap in the door. Steady. Watching. Almost amused. Evelina set the phone back on the sink. She sat in that bathroom for another hour. She thought about what it meant to call him, what it would require of her, going back, explaining, watching him try to make it right, being the woman who came back, being inside his world again, where nothing was truly hers, and safety was a gift he gave her rather than something she had built with her own hands. She thought about Sabina's smile for a very long time. Then she made the hardest decision she would ever make. She would not call. She would keep this to herself. And she would do it alone. Doing it alone was not romantic. She wanted to be honest about that because she had told herself a version of it that was cleaner than the truth. The clean version was she was strong. She was independent. She built a life from nothing and proved she needed no one. That version had the shape of a story she could be proud of. The real version was exhausting and frequently frightening, and there were nights when she lay awake in the dark, listening to the sounds of a city that was not hers, and she felt something that she couldn't call anything other than pure loneliness. Pregnancy was hard. She had morning sickness that ran through lunch and sometimes into the evening. She had no one to bring her tea. She worked as long as she could, building her client list, keeping her rates competitive, taking on extra documents when she felt well enough. She found a midwife who was patient with her questions. She learned that she was carrying twins at 14 weeks, alone in an ultrasound room with a screen she couldn't fully see, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. 2. She was going to do this alone with 2. She cried on the bus ride home. Not quietly, not gracefully. She sat in the back row, and she cried the way people cry when they think no one who knows them can see, which is a different and worse kind of crying than anything done in private. An older woman across the aisle handed her a packet of tissues and didn't say anything, and Evelina took them and said "obrigada" in a voice she barely recognized. She went home. She made herself eat. She opened her laptop. She kept going. By the time Nico and Julian were born early, by 3 weeks, in a hospital where she had paid out of pocket for a private room, because she refused to be in a ward where she might say Dario's name in whatever state labor put her in. She had a system. Team. Work, sleep, work. The small rituals that made a life feel like something she had assembled, rather than something that was happening to her. The boys were small and loud and entirely uninterested in her feelings about any of this. Nico came first, in the early hours of the morning, and he arrived screaming, which the midwife said was a good sign, and Evelina held him against her chest and felt the full weight of the choice she had made settle over her like something permanent. Julian arrived 11 minutes later, quieter, and looked at her with an expression that she would spend years trying to describe and never quite manage to get right. Serious, curious, like a person who had already decided to watch carefully before committing to anything. He has Dario's eyes, she thought. She looked at both of them. Dark hair, dark eyes, the particular shape of a jaw she had kissed 1,000 times. She held them, and she did not call anyone. She had moved twice by then out of Moraria, where the streets were too steep, with twin stroller logistics, and into a coastal town north of Setúbal, where she had found work with a Portuguese law firm, and where the rent was low enough that she could breathe financially. She had given herself a new name on the professional registry. Eve Marin. Simple. Untraceable to Evelina Moretti without a deliberate search. She had not disappeared because she was afraid of Dario. She had disappeared because she was afraid of what it would mean to go back. Because going back meant admitting that the life she had tried to build solid, independent, earned had been incomplete from the start. Because going back meant looking at that smile again, not Sabina's, but the one on her own face the day she left, the almost smile of someone who believed they were finally free. She wasn't ready to find out if that freedom had been real or just another kind of cage with the door left open. So she stayed gone, and the boys grew. They were 5 years old, before Evelina stopped checking her reflection in shop at windows out of instinct. She had moved again one final time to São Aurelio, a small town on the Portuguese coast where the tourist season was quiet enough that unfamiliar faces were easy to notice. She had chosen it deliberately, a place where she would see strangers clearly, where she could work from home most days, where the boys could go to a school small enough that the teachers knew every parent by sight. The apartment was on the third floor of an old building, with a cranky elevator that Nico had declared broken since the first month and refused to use. They took the stairs. Julian complained every morning on the way up and said nothing on the way down, which Evelina had decided told you everything important about Julian's character. She had furniture now, her own. Not secondhand, some of it was secondhand, because her income, while stable, was carefully managed but chosen by her, placed where she wanted it, organized in the particular way that made sense to her brain and no one else's. Nico liked his toy cars arranged by color. Julian liked his books stacked by height, not by title, which had led to one memorable argument between the two of them that Evelina had let run for 20 minutes before intervening because she was honestly curious which of them would win. Nico had won. Julian had sulked for an afternoon, and then quietly rearranged 3 of his own books by color to create what he called a compromise, which it wasn't, but which Evelina had diplomatically praised. She loved them more than she had understood was possible to love anything. She also loved the life she had built around them. The translation firm she had registered in her own name the previous year. The network of legal clients who sent her complex international documents and relied on her judgment. The small but real reputation she had built as someone whose work you could trust. It was not the life she had imagined when she was 28 and in love with a man in a Rome estate with marble hallways. It was better, it was actually hers. But she had never been naive enough to believe that better and safe were the same word. She noticed the car on a Tuesday, black. Portuguese plates, but the model was a make she associated with Rome. She recognized it the way you recognize a song you didn't know you'd memorized. Parked across from Nico and Julian's school. She had walked the boys in that morning and stood at the gate for the usual 2 minutes of goodbye conversation. With Julian was brief and practical, and with Nico always extended into at least one additional topic he insisted was urgent. "Mom, can we get a fish? We'll talk about it later, love." You always say that, because later is always when I'm better at decisions. She had kissed them both, turned to go, and she had seen the car. She did not stop walking. She had trained herself out of that particular tell years ago. She kept her pace, turned at the corner, went 2 blocks north, and stood in a doorway where she could see the street without being visible from the school. Car stayed. She watched for 6 minutes. No one got in or out. The windows were tinted enough that she couldn't see the driver clearly. 1 person, she thought. Maybe 2. Her stomach had not dropped with panic. It had dropped with recognition. So she thought. Here. She walked home the long way, taking 4 turns she didn't need to take. And she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and she thought about what came next. She had always known this moment was theoretically possible. Dario had resources that most people couldn't imagine. He was patient. He was methodical. He had people whose entire job was to look for things other people wanted to hide. She had given herself 5 years. She had been, if she was honest with herself, slightly surprised it had taken this long. She picked up her phone, her real phone, not a burner. She had stopped rotating them when the boys started school, because the logistics of 2 children required a stable number, and she stared at it. Then she put it back down and opened her laptop and started work on a contract document that was due Thursday, because the boys would be home at 3, and she had 6 hours and a deadline, and panic was not a productive use of 6 hours. She worked. She kept going. That was the one thing Evelina Moretti had never stopped being good at. Keeping going. She was outside the building. Arms full of groceries from the Wednesday market. Julian had requested the specific kind of orange juice that came in a glass bottle, and Nico had asked for the yogurt that came in individual pots. And she had bought both because she was weak in exactly these ways when the second car appeared. This one she didn't recognize. It was parked differently. Angle wrong. Nose pointing toward the alley at the side of the building rather than the street. 2 men in the front seats not bothering to look away when she glanced at them. That was the tell. Dario's people didn't look away because they weren't afraid of being seen. They weren't hiding. They were watching. There was a difference. These men were positioned. Her body understood it before her mind completed the thought. Something went cold across the back of her neck. Her hands tightened on the grocery bags. Julian's juice bottle, Nico's yogurt. The weight of ordinary things bought for a life she had spent 5 years making real. She kept walking toward the building entrance. The car doors opened. And then a third thing happened that she had not anticipated. From somewhere behind her, fast, quiet, the kind of movement that happens before you understand it's happening, a figure stepped between her and the men getting out of the car. She turned, and for the first time in 5 years, she looked at Dario Vescari. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the two men, and the look on his face was something she had only seen twice before. Once when a business associate had made the mistake of threatening someone Dario cared about, and once, years ago, when she had told him that a man had followed her home from work. It was not an angry face. It was something quieter than anger. Something that understood violence as a simple language and was currently speaking it without raising its voice. The two men stopped. They exchanged a look. Then they got back in the car. Car left. Dario turned. Evelina was still holding the groceries. The elevator lobby door was open behind her. Inside the building, she could hear her neighbor's radio playing something faintly familiar. The hallway light flickered, the way it always did, on the third-floor landing. Everything was very ordinary, and nothing was ordinary at all. Dario looked at her, and his face did something she didn't have a name for. Something she had not prepared for. Not the cold, controlled expression she had carried in her memory for 5 years. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, and she had once been very good at reading him, like a man who had found something he had given up, believing he deserved to find. Then his eyes moved past her, up, to the third-floor window, where Nico and Julian, who had arrived home from school 20 minutes early because of a teacher meeting, were standing with their faces pressed to the glass, watching the scene below the way 5-year-olds watch anything unusual. Dark hair, dark eyes, the shape of a jaw. Dario went very still. When he looked back at her, the expression on his face had changed completely. And Evelina thought, here it is. Here is the moment everything costs. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said to the only thing she could say, the thing that was both true and not enough, and absolutely necessary. Stay away from my children. His voice, when he answered, was quieter than she remembered it. Our children. The groceries in her arms had never felt so heavy. Above them, in the third-floor window, 2 small faces watched and waited with the particular intensity that children have when they understand that something important is happening, even when no one has explained to them what it is. Evelina had spent 5 years making sure she was standing on solid ground. She was about to find out how much of it could hold. The groceries made it upstairs. Evelina didn't remember climbing the stairs. She had a fragmented impression of the building lobby, the familiar smell of old tiles and someone's dinner cooking on the second floor, the sound of her own keys against the lock. She set the bags on the kitchen counter and stood there with both hands flat on the surface for a moment, looking at Julian's glass bottle of orange juice and thinking about absolutely nothing. Then Nico's voice came from the hallway. Mom, who was that man? She turned around. Both boys were standing in the kitchen doorway, in their school clothes, backpacks still on. Julian had his hands in his jacket pockets. Nico was looking at her with the particular expression he had inherited from somewhere she refused to examine, steady, patient, waiting for an answer that matched what he already suspected. Someone I used to know, she said. From before Portugal? She looked at him. 5 years old and already asking the questions she didn't want to answer. Yes. Is he coming back? She opened the refrigerator and put the yogurt inside. Go wash your hands before dinner. Mom, hands. Please. Julian tugged Nico's sleeve, and they disappeared down the hall. She could hear them arguing in low voices about something unrelated, the fish, probably, or the book arrangement, and she stood at the refrigerator with the door still open and the cold air hitting her face, and she breathed. In. Out. She closed the refrigerator. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she had kept from her old life. Not a friend, a lawyer. A woman named Katerina who handled her business contracts and who knew enough about Evelina's history to ask only the questions that mattered. "He found me," Evelina said when Katerina picked up. A beat of silence. "Tonight? Yes. The boys? With me. Do you want me to start looking at emergency relocation options?" Evelina sat down at the kitchen table. Through the window, she could see the street below. Empty now. The black car was gone. The other car was gone. Just the ordinary Tuesday evening of a small coastal town, a woman walking a dog, a teenager on a bicycle, the bakery across the street pulling its shutters down for the night. "Not yet," she said. "Let me think." She ended the call and sat there while the boys washed their hands and argued, and eventually came to demand dinner, and she made pasta because it was fast and required no thinking. And she sat across from them at the small table and watched them eat and talk and kick each other's ankles under their chairs. And she tried to remember what her life had felt like 4 hours ago, when the biggest concern on the table had been Julian's specific orange juice requirements. It felt very far away. He came back the next morning. She had expected it. She had lain awake most of the night running through possibilities, and she had decided by 4 a.m. that running was not the right move, not yet, not until she understood what she was dealing with. Was this just Dario? Was this Dario plus his organization, which meant eyes on every exit from Sao Aurelio? Was this Dario plus a threat she hadn't identified yet, which would mean the men from yesterday were not his at all? She needed information before she needed a plan. So when the knock came at 8 in the morning after the boys were at school, she had made sure of that. She had walked them herself and taken the long route back. She opened the door. Dario was alone. No Raphael, no security she could see, though she assumed that was cosmetic. He was wearing dark trousers and a gray jacket, no tie, which she recognized as his version of trying to look non-threatening. He had never quite figured out how to look non-threatening. Posture was wrong. The stillness was wrong. Some men you can dress down and they just look casual. Dario dressed down and he still looked like a man who made decisions that other people had to live with. He looked tired. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not the old familiar tiredness of a man who worked too hard and slept too little. Something deeper than that. Something that had been sitting on him for longer than one night. "May I come in?" he said. "No," she said. "We can talk here." He didn't argue. He stood in the hallway, and she leaned against the doorframe, and they looked at each other for a moment with 5 years of unspoken things stacked between them, like furniture blocking a corridor. "How long have you been watching?" she said. 4 days. "Before the men yesterday?" "Yes. So you knew about them." "I suspected they were coming. I didn't know when." He paused. "I moved faster than I wanted to." "What does that mean?" "You moved faster than you wanted to." He looked at her steadily. "It means I had a plan for how to do this, and yesterday I abandoned it. Because I wasn't going to let them get close to you." She studied him. "Who were they?" "Bellecourt Organization." "Aldo's people." She knew the name. She had translated enough criminal enterprise documents in her professional life to recognize the structures, the language, the networks. She had known, in an abstract way, that Dario's world had rivals. She had simply stopped thinking about it when she left that world behind. "They followed you here," she said. "Possibly. Or they found you independently." "I don't know yet." He said it without flinching, which she recognized as its own kind of honesty. He could have told her it was his fault and asked for forgiveness in the same breath. Instead, he was telling her what was true, even when what was true was that he didn't have the full picture. She hated how familiar that was, how easy it still was to read him. "What do they want?" she said. "Leverage, against me." His voice was flat. "They know about the twins." The hallway felt colder than it was. "How?" "They've been building intelligence on me for 8 months. My surveillance failed to catch it until 6 weeks ago. By the time I understood what they'd found." He stopped. Looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "By then, I already knew where you were, and you came to warn me." "I came because I needed to see you," he said. "The warning is real. But don't let me make it sound purely strategic. It wasn't." She looked at him for a long time. "You should have called." "Would you have answered?" She had no answer for that. She moved away from the door, not inviting him in, just creating space, because standing in a doorway for a difficult conversation made her feel cornered, and she refused to feel cornered in her own home. She went to the kitchen table and sat. He came to the doorway of the kitchen and stopped there, reading the signal correctly. "Talk," she said. He talked for 40 minutes. He was thorough. She had forgotten that about him, how thorough he was when something mattered. He laid out the Bellacourt situation without softening it. Aldo had been building toward a territorial confrontation for 2 years. Dario's organization had strengthened, but so had Aldo's, and rather than direct conflict, Aldo had identified a pressure point. Dario's people, in the years since Evelina's disappearance, had noticed a pattern in him that his rivals had now also noticed. A man who had lost something and hadn't recovered from it. A man who might trade territory for the right kind of leverage. "They think I would give them what they want if they had the boys," Dario said. "They're right." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not going to let them find that out," he added. "But I'm telling you the truth. Yes, if they had my sons, I would give them whatever they asked for." "They're not your sons," she said, and heard how it came out, and held the words there, because she needed them to mean what she meant them to mean. His jaw tightened. It was the only movement on his face. "I know you have the right to say that to me. It's not about rights. It's about the truth. You haven't been their father. You're a biological fact. That's different. I know. Do you?" He looked at her and she saw it again, that thing on his face that she didn't have a name for, that was somehow worse than anger, worse than grief, because it was both, and also something quieter underneath both. Like a man staring at the results of an equation he solved too late. "I saw you walk them to school yesterday morning," he said. "I watched from the car. Julian stopped twice to look at something in a shop window. Nico walked ahead and then came back to wait for him without being asked. He stopped. I watched you tie Julian's shoe outside the gate. He was already complaining about something. I couldn't hear what. You said something back, and he stopped complaining, and then made a face at Nico. She was not going to ask him why he was telling her this. I sat in that car," he said, "and I thought about what I missed. Not in the abstract. Specifically. Morning by morning by morning. 5 years of mornings. That's not something I caused," she said. "You need to be clear about that. I am clear about it. Because it's going to be very easy, Dario, for the story you tell yourself to turn into one where I took something from you. And that can't be the story, because that story is not true." He was quiet for a moment. "I know whose fault it is. Say it plainly, mine." He said it without hesitation and without drama, and that was the part she hadn't prepared for. She had prepared for excuses. For the rationalization, she had rehearsed responses to 100 times in her own head, and instead he simply said, "Mine. What I did was unforgivable. I'm not here to ask you to forgive it. I'm here because my children are in danger, and the danger is a direct consequence of who I am, and I can't fix that from Rome, with you refusing my calls." She sat with that. "You don't know that I would have refused your calls," she said. "You've had the same phone number for 18 months. It's not difficult information to find." She said nothing. "I found it 8 months ago," he said. She stared at him. "You had my number for 8 months." "Yes, and you didn't call." "No." She leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment and then back at him. "Why not?" "Because I didn't have the right to call, just because I found you. Because I wasn't ready to give you something worth picking up the phone for." He met her eyes. "Because I needed to understand what I was offering before I showed up asking for anything." She did not say anything immediately. She was thinking about that answer and how it sat alongside everything else. And the problem was that it made sense in the particular way that Dario's logic had always made sense to her, constructed, patient, thought through. She had always been attracted to the way he thought before he acted. She was also aware that she was noticing that attraction, and she wasn't interested in examining it at close range. "You can't stay in Sao Aurelio," he said. "I understand that. And running again is... I know what running again means." She cut him off. Not harshly, but firmly. "I've spent 5 years understanding exactly what running costs. Don't explain my options to me." He nodded. "I need to think," she said. "You're going to leave now and you're going to give me 24 hours. Bellacourt, I understand the timeline. 24 hours, Dario. And if your people have eyes on this building, tell them to stay invisible. If my boys see anything that frightens them, we're going to have a much bigger problem than Aldo Bellacorte. He stood, straightened his jacket. She noticed his hands. She had always noticed his hands, and she noticed now that there was a scar across the left one she didn't recognize, and she did not ask about it. The number I'm using, he said. He took a card from his jacket pocket, plain white, just digits, and set it on the kitchen table. It doesn't go anywhere that can be traced. I know how burner phones work, she said. He almost smiled. It was a ghost of a thing, gone before it arrived. I know you do. Then he left. She sat at the kitchen table looking at the plain white card, and she thought about how there had been a time when she thought she knew everything about the man who had just walked out of her kitchen, and how she had been wrong about that in one very specific and catastrophic way, and how the problem with the brain was that knowing a thing was wrong didn't stop you from recognizing the parts of it that were also true. She made coffee. She stared at the card. Then she picked up her phone and called Katerina back and said, I need to know everything you can find me about a company called Bellacorte within the next 18 hours. She picked the boys up from school herself. She had arranged with the teacher the day before a minor logistical lie about a family matter so that she could take them directly from the classroom rather than the gate. On the walk home, she let them talk. Julian had a complaint about a boy in his class who had taken the red crayon and not returned it. Nico had won a foot race and wanted it acknowledged with appropriate ceremony. She acknowledged it. Mom, you're not listening, Nico said. I am. You won by how much? 4 steps. That's significant. I know it's significant. That's what I'm saying. She held his hand crossing the street, and he let her, which at 5 years old was still a negotiable situation, depending on his mood. That evening she cooked properly. Real food, not pasta out of time. She sat with them through dinner, and she let the conversation run wherever they took it, and she tried to simply be present rather than planning, because the planning would still be there after bedtime. And right now there were 2 small people at her table who needed her brain to be in this room. After dinner, while Julian was washing his hands with the excessive enthusiasm he applied to all hygiene tasks, Nico came to stand beside her at the counter. Mom, is the man from yesterday going to come back? She dried her hands on the dish towel. She looked down at him. He was watching her with those eyes that were not, at close range, easy to look at. Probably, she said, because she didn't lie to them. She had made that decision when they were very young. The world would deliver them enough lies without her adding to the supply. Nico considered this. Is he dangerous? He was. He's trying to be different. Trying isn't the same as being. She stared at him for a moment. No, she said. You're right, it isn't. He went back to the dinner table to retrieve a small toy car he'd left there, seemingly satisfied. She stood at the counter and thought, he has Dario's eyes and my brain, and I have no idea what that combination is going to do to the world someday. Call came at 6 the next morning. Not Dario's number. A number she didn't recognize, which meant it was someone else entirely, and for a moment some stomach clenched. Then she answered. It was Raphael Orsini. She hadn't spoken to Raphael in 5 years. She had liked him. In the old life, liked him more than most of Dario's world, which was not a high bar. But Raphael had always spoken to her like a person rather than an asset, and he had never once treated her presence in Dario's life as something to manage. His voice was exactly the same, low, slightly rough at the edges, like someone who had been awake too long for too many years. Evelina. He used her real name, not Eve, not Mrs. Marin, I'm sorry to call this early. What happened? Nothing yet. That's why I'm calling. A pause. 2 of Bellacorte's men were seen in the town last night. Not near your building. Near the school. Her vision went very slightly white at the edges. She sat up in bed. The school. They were photographing it. Street level. Entrance and exit points. Raphael's voice was steady but deliberate. He was giving her information, the way you give someone information when you don't want them to panic, but you need them to understand the urgency. They were gone before midnight, but the intelligence is current. She was already standing, moving toward the boys' room. She pushed the door open, both of them asleep, Nico with his arm flung sideways, Julian curled against the wall, putz, and she stood in the doorway with the phone against her ear, and she breathed. They're not going to wait much longer, Rafael said. I know. Dario can have transport here in 3 hours. There's a property in the countryside that's outside Evora, not connected to any of his business structures, privately held under a third-party name. Clean, secure. The boys would have space and the perimeter. Rafael, is Dario outside my building right now? A pause that was half a second too long. He didn't sleep at the hotel. She closed her eyes briefly. Tell him to come up. Dario looked worse in the morning light than he had the day before. He had clearly not slept. His jacket was the same one from yesterday. There was a quality to his stillness that she recognized from years past the particular tension of a man who had been running calculations in his head through the night and had reached a point where the calculations were telling him things he didn't want to hear. He came inside without saying anything. She poured coffee. She set it in front of him at the kitchen table, and he wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at it. The school, she said. I know. My children go to that school every morning. I know, Evelina. Don't tell me you know. Tell me what we're doing about it. He looked up at her. We're leaving Sao Aurelio today. All of us. She had arrived at this conclusion herself, somewhere between Rafael's call and Dario's arrival. She had sat with it for 4 minutes, which was as long as she allowed herself, and she had understood that the options were run alone again, which left her exposed, stay, which was not survivable, or accept the temporary protection of a man she did not fully trust in order to buy time to build something better. There was no clean choice. There had stopped being a clean choice the moment those 2 men photographed her son's school entrance. Not Rome, she said. No, not yet. A place I can verify independently. He nodded. I'll have the documentation for the property sent to whatever lawyer you want to verify it. She almost told him about Katerina. She stopped herself. I'll arrange my own verification. Fine. The boys don't get told anything that frightens them. We're taking a trip, a holiday, something they can understand as ordinary. Fine, and Dario. She waited until he looked at her. You are not moving into a location with my children on the assumption that it means anything beyond safety. Do you understand me? This is not you coming back. This is not us going back. This is a threat response. Nothing more. He looked at her for a long moment. Say it back to me. His jaw worked slightly. This is a threat response. I'm not assuming anything beyond that. She nodded. Give me 2 hours to pack. She walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway to the boys' room, and she stood in the doorway, again looking at them sleeping, and she thought about the apartment she had found, and painted herself, and the furniture she had chosen piece by piece, and the particular quality of the light through the kitchen window in the morning, and the bakery across the street, and the school where both her sons knew every teacher's name. She had built something real here. She was walking away from it. Not because she was weak, not because she couldn't protect them alone, because the men who had photographed that school entrance did not care about her independence or the life she had constructed, or the 5 years she had spent becoming a woman who needed no one. They cared only that Dario Vescari had something to lose, and her sons were what he had to lose. That was the trap, she realized. It had always been the trap, not Dario himself, not even Sabina, and the smile through the doorway. The real trap was simpler and crueler than any of it, that the moment she had those boys, she had created something that connected her to his world, permanently, regardless of what she chose. You could leave a man. You could not leave your children's inheritance. She went to wake them up. Nico, Julian. She touched their shoulders. We're going on a trip today. Nico sat up immediately, already alert in the way he always was. Zero transition between sleep and wakefulness. Where? Somewhere new. An adventure. Julian made a sound that was not a word and pulled the blanket over his head. Jules. She tugged the blanket. Come on, love. Up. One eye appeared above the blanket. Is the man coming? She paused. What man? The man from the window. Julian said it with absolute calm, as if the question were perfectly ordinary. Nico says he's probably our father. She looked at Nico. He met her gaze with an expression that was unsettlingly close to an apology. We were just wondering, Nico said. She sat on the edge of Julian's bed. She thought about what she had told herself ago, about not lying to them. She thought about how there were different kinds of lies. Kind that protect, the kind that damage, the kind that simply delay. She decided on truth because delay would cost more than it bought. Yes, she said, he's your father. Julian emerged fully from the blanket. Why didn't you tell us? Because some things take time to explain. Is he nice? She thought about that for a longer moment than she intended to. He's trying to be. Nico was quiet for a second. Then, is trying enough? She had heard those words before, in her own head. Across the kitchen counter just last night, from a 5-year-old who didn't know he was answering his own question. I don't know yet, she said. That's the honest answer. I don't know yet. Nico nodded like that was acceptable. Julian looked at the ceiling, processing in the way Julian processed things slowly, thoroughly, in silence. Okay, Julian said finally. Can I bring my books? Pack 3, she said. Your backpack only, 4. 3, Julian. 3.5. That's not a real number in the context of books. He was already out of bed and moving toward the shelf, which meant he had decided she was wrong about the number and was going to pack 4 and present it as 3 boys that were in the car. She let it go. She went back to her room and she stood at her own window and she looked out at São Aurelio, the quiet street, the bakery shutters, the ordinary sky over a town she had deliberately chosen for its ordinariness, and she understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that nothing about the next part of her life was going to be ordinary. The question was not whether she could survive that. She already knew she could survive almost anything. The question was what she was going to survive it as. She pulled her bag from under the bed and started. Car smelled like leather and old coffee, and something faintly chemical that Evelina associated with vehicles maintained by people who cared more about function than comfort. Raphael drove. Dario sat in the front passenger seat. Evelina sat in the back between Nico and Julian, which had been her deliberate choice. She had positioned herself there before anyone could suggest an alternative arrangement, and neither Dario nor Raphael had said anything about it. Julian had fallen asleep within 20 minutes, his head against her arm, his backpack on his lap, containing what she was fairly certain was 4 books. Nico was awake and watching the landscape move past his window with the concentrated attention he gave to everything new. Nobody spoke for the first hour. It was Nico who broke it. Raphael glanced in the rearview mirror. Yeah. How do you know my father? A pause. Raphael's eyes moved briefly to Dario, who said nothing and kept looking at the road. We grew up in the same neighborhood, Raphael said. Long time ago. Were you friends? Still are. Nico considered this. Do you have children? No, why not? Nico, Evelina said quietly. It's fine, Raphael said. He thought about it for a moment. She could see his hands shift slightly on the wheel, a small adjustment that meant he was choosing his words. Some people build families. Some people protect other people's families. I'm better at the second one. Nico appeared to find this satisfactory. He went back to the window. Dario had not turned around once during the entire exchange. She watched the back of his head, and she thought about what it must cost him to sit in the front seat of his own car while his son asked questions of someone else, and he had not yet earned the right to answer them himself. She thought, good. Then she thought, that's not fair. Then she thought, fairness is not the priority right now, and I can examine my own cruelty later. The property outside Evora was not what she had expected. She had imagined something that looked like money, the particular kind of money Dario's world generated, which expressed itself in scale and security, and a certain aggressive permanence. Gates and columns, and the implied message that this place had been built to make someone feel powerful. Instead, it was a farmhouse. Old stone, thick walls, a courtyard with a fig tree growing out of a crack in the paving. The kind of place that had been standing long enough that it had simply become part of the landscape rather than imposed upon it. There were 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that had been modernized but not aggressively, and a long back garden that ended at a stone wall with olive trees beyond it. 2 men she didn't recognize were already there. She clocked them at the entrance position, posture, the way they oriented toward Raphael rather than Dario. which told her something about the organizational structure here. Perimeter, she said to Raphael quietly as they got out of the car. 3 men outside the wall, rotating, 2 on the access road. He said it without looking at her casually, the way you mentioned weather. Nothing visible to the boys. She nodded. Julian had woken up during the last 20 minutes of the drive and was now standing in the courtyard looking at the fig tree with the particular expression he used for things he was deciding whether or not to like. Nico had already walked the full perimeter of the courtyard and was crouching near the back gate examining something on the ground. There are lizards, he announced. Don't touch them, Evelina said automatically. I'm not touching them, I'm observing them. She brought both bags inside, and she chose the bedroom, at the end of the hall, farthest from the main entrance, which put a wall between the boys and whatever might come through the front, and gave her a window with a line of sight to the back garden. She had not made that calculation consciously. She had simply walked to that room and put the bags down, and then stood there, recognizing what she had done. 5 years had changed the way her brain worked, in ways she hadn't fully cataloged until now. She unpacked what needed unpacking, which wasn't much, and she listened to the sounds of the house, settling around the noise of her sons. Julian asking Dario whether the fig tree was edible, Dario saying he believed so. Julian immediately climbing it with no further discussion, Nico telling Julian he was going to fall, Julian saying he wasn't, Nico calculating the probability of this. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom, and she listened to that specific chaos, and she felt something complicated move through her chest. The first full day was almost manageable. That was the word she kept coming back to. Manageable. As in, she could see the seams of the situation clearly enough to move through it without losing herself in it. She established routines for the boys as quickly as possible, because routine was the only thing that made a disrupted environment feel survivable to a 5-year-old. Breakfast at the same time. The back garden for an hour in the morning. Booksits in the afternoon. Dinner before dark. Dario moved around the edges of these routines without inserting himself. She noticed that. He didn't ask to join breakfast. He didn't suggest activities. He was simply present in the kitchen when they came downstairs, reading something she couldn't see, who stood up when the boys appeared and asked Julian if he wanted help with the fig tree situation, and asked Nico if he'd found any more lizards. He was performing no version of fatherhood. He was just being in the same space as them and letting them decide what to do with that. Julian decided almost immediately. By the end of the first afternoon, he had attached himself to Dario's general vicinity with the uncomplicated ease that was entirely Julian's personality. He decided things quickly and thoroughly and didn't second-guess them, which was both his greatest strength and the thing that was going to give Evelina the most gray hairs over the next decade. Nico was different. Nico watched. She understood Nico's watching because she was doing the same thing, and she recognized her own mechanics in him with a precision that was occasionally painful. That evening after dinner, while Julian was in the bath, and Nico was sitting on the back step in the last of the daylight, with a toy car in both hands, not really playing with it, Dario came and sat beside him. Not close, 2 feet of space between them on the step. He didn't say anything immediately. Nico didn't say anything either. They sat like that for several minutes, which Evelina watched from the kitchen window, and she thought, this is either going to be the beginning of something or the end of any possibility of something, and whichever it is, it will be decided by a 5-year-old, which is exactly what Dario deserves. You don't have to like me, Dario said, finally. She could barely hear it through the glass. Nico turned the car over in his hands. I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of that. Why? A pause. Because some adults pretend that children are supposed to automatically trust them. I think that's not honest. Nico looked at him sideways. You're saying you might not be trustworthy. I'm saying trust should be earned. And I haven't earned yours yet. Nico thought about this for what felt like a long time. Then you made Mom cry. Dario didn't move, yes. How do I know you won't do it again? The pause this time was longer. She pressed her hand flat against the kitchen window glass without realizing she'd moved. You don't, Dario said. Watch me. Nico looked at him directly for the first time. Studied him the way he studied the lizards, thorough, patient, without committing to a conclusion. Then he looked back at his car. Okay, he said. Not acceptance. Not forgiveness. Just, I've registered your answer, and I'll be watching to see if it's true. She stepped back from the window. Katerina called on the second morning. Evelina took it in the bedroom with the door closed, sitting on the edge of the bed with her laptop open, and the documents Katerina had compiled spread across the screen. Katerina had been thorough. She always was. The Bellacourt Holding Company has 6 subsidiaries that I can identify through public registry, Katerina said. 3 of them are connected to transportation contracts in southern Portugal. 2 of those contracts are active. Active with which institutions? One is a private school supply network. The other is a medical equipment distributor, a BEAT. The school network has contracts with 11 schools in the Setúbal region. Evelina went very still. Setúbal region. Which schools? She heard Katerina click through something. I'm looking. It's a broad contract. Covers distribution across multiple sites. I'm pulling the school list now. Evelina looked at the wall in front of her. She was calculating. Bellacorte had business infrastructure in the same region as São Aurelio. That was either coincidence, or it was how they'd found her not through surveillance of Dario, but through a pre-existing network that had already touched her world without her knowing it. Katerina, the school my boys attend. Is it on the list? The silence lasted 6 seconds. She counted. Yes, Katerina said. Evelina closed her eyes. Evelina, I'm here. There's more. Supply contracts include personnel access drivers, maintenance contractors. Anyone operating under the distribution agreement has documented access rights to school facilities. It's standard language in these contracts, but it means they had legitimate access to the school grounds. Evelina opened her eyes. Her voice was completely level, and she was aware of that in the specific way you're aware of something you're forcing. They didn't need to photograph it from the outside. They already had people inside. That's what the contract language suggests. Yes. How long has that contract been active? Another click. 14 months. 14 months. Her boys had been attending that school for 11 months. The access predated their enrollment by 3 months. It was not targeted surveillance, built around finding her specifically. It was infrastructure already in place, waiting to be used for whatever purpose presented itself. She thought about Julian, who talked to every adult, who appeared within conversational range, and did not have a suspicious bone in his body. She thought about Nico, who noticed everything, but hadn't known what he was looking for. She thought about 14 months of men with legitimate contractor IDs walking through that school's gates, and she had walked her sons past them every morning. Send me everything, she said. All of it. Every document. Already sent. Katerina hesitated, which she almost never did. There's something else. Tell me. I ran the third-party name on the Evora property. The one Raphael said holds the farmhouse. Something shifted in Evelina's chest. Small and cold. And it's clean. The property itself is clean. Another hesitation. But the legal firm that registered it is connected to a corporate structure I've seen before. It appeared in 3 previous documents I reviewed when I was pulling Bellacorte's network. The cold thing in her chest spread. You're telling me the property has a connection to Bellacorte. I'm telling you the registration firm does. Whether that connection extends to the property itself, whether it's coincidence, whether Dario knows, whether he doesn't, I can't tell you from what I have. Evelina stood up from the bed. She walked to the window. The back garden was empty. The olive trees beyond the wall moved slightly. In a morning wind, she couldn't feel from inside. Does Raphael know about this firm? She said. I have no way to determine that. She pressed her free hand against the window frame. Katerina. Worst case scenario. Katerina was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. Worst case is that this location was selected because someone with knowledge of Bellacorte's network directed that selection, which would mean either Dario's organization has been compromised at a level he isn't aware of, or someone inside it chose this location deliberately. Yes, she stood at the window and she thought about Raphael, about how she had known Raphael for 4 years in her old life and had trusted him in the particular way. She trusted reliable machinery, not with her heart, but with her practical judgment. About how he had called her before Dario had, that morning in Sao Aurelio. About how he had known exactly where to call and exactly what to say, and had laid out the solution, this property, this location, with a precision and a speed that she had read at the time as competence. She was rereading it now. I need you to do one more thing, she said. Name it. Find out who specifically recommended this property. Go back through whatever channels you can reach. I need a name. That might take time. You have 6 hours. She ended the call. She stood at the window for 2 full minutes, without moving, running the new information against everything she had seen and heard in the past 48 hours. The sequencing mattered. Raphael's call had come first, before Dario's arrival at her apartment, before the conversation in her kitchen. Raphael had named this property. Raphael had said it was clean and privately held and secure. She thought about the 2 men at the farmhouse entrance who had oriented toward Raphael rather than Dario. She thought up about the way Raphael had given her the security briefing without Dario present. She thought about Dario, who had not slept at the hotel, who had spent the night outside her building since Aurelium's because he could not make himself leave, and she thought about what that meant for a man who was supposed to be the one in control here. He was not in control. He was reactive. He had been reacting to her since the moment she opened that door. Raphael had been planning. She left the bedroom. Dario was in the kitchen, alone. Raphael was outside. She could see him through the glass in the courtyard, phone to his ear. The boys were in the back garden. She sat across from Dario at the kitchen table, and she looked at him and she said, "Who chose this location?" He looked up from his coffee. Raphael identified it. He's had the property on file for... How long has he had it on file? About a year, maybe 14 months. The exact number arrived in her chest like ice water. Kept her face still. Did he explain why he chose this specific property over others? He said it was the cleanest title. Nothing connected to our operations. Dario put the coffee down. He was reading her face now. She could see him doing it. The same focused attention that had always meant he understood. Something was wrong. What happened? I need you to answer something honestly. I've been answering honestly. I know you believe that. She put her hands flat on the table. The legal firm that registered this property, do you know its name? He named it without hesitating. She watched his face when she told him. It appeared 3 times in Bellacorte's corporate structure. She watched him very carefully. What she saw was not guilt. What she saw was a man being told that the ground he thought was solid had just become water. His jaw tightened. His eyes went to the window, where Raphael was still on the phone in the courtyard. His hands flat on the table, pressed down with a pressure she recognized as a man holding himself completely still, because the alternative was movement he couldn't afford. "How certain is your source?" he said. His voice was exactly level and exactly wrong, too level. The specific tone of someone removing all register from their voice because they don't trust what register might come out. "Certain enough," she said. 14 months. Yes. He looked at Raphael through the window. Dario. She kept her voice low. This location was selected because someone knew Bellacorte's network. I know what it means. Then you also know that we cannot have this conversation where Raphael can see us having it. His eyes came back to her, dark, completely focused. You think, Raphael, I think we cannot afford assumptions right now. About anyone. He was silent for a long moment. She watched him work through it, the same methodical processing she had observed for 4 years. The way he never rushed a conclusion, but never flinched from one either. She had always respected that about him, even when she resented it. He thought before he acted. It had also, once, been how he had convinced himself that what he'd done was manageable. That she would understand. That the damage was containable. She shelved that thought. "The boys need to stay in the back garden," he said finally. "Keep them there for the next 20 minutes. What are you going to do?" "Talk to Raphael, Dario." "Not like that." He met her eyes. "I'm going to ask him a question. One question. And I'm going to watch how he answers it. And if the answer is wrong..." He picked up his coffee mug, looked at it for a second, set it back down. "Then we leave within the hour." She nodded. She pushed back from the table and went to the back garden, and she stood in the morning sun, and she watched her boys with the olive trees beyond the wall, and she tried not to think about the 14 months of a contract she hadn't known existed, about the school gate she had walked them through 200 times, about everything she thought she'd been careful about, while the real danger was sitting inside the infrastructure of ordinary life. She heard the courtyard door open. She heard Raphael's voice, and then Dario's, low, the words themselves inaudible from where she stood. Then silence. Then a sound that was not a word, a sharp, clipped sound she recognized from years ago, something Dario made when something cut through his composure from the inside. She turned. Through the kitchen window, she could see both men. Raphael had his back to the glass. Dario was facing her direction but looking at Raphael, and she could see his face fully. She had seen Dario angry before. She had seen him cold, and she had seen him controlled, and she had once, years before everything fell apart, seen him genuinely frightened, and she had cataloged those faces and the distances between them. This was none of those. This was something she didn't have a name for. Something that happened when a man discovers that a betrayal he thought was in his past has been operating in his present without his knowledge. Something that happens at the precise moment when the person you trusted most in the world becomes a question mark instead of a fact. Raphael turned around. She could see his face now too. And she understood immediately, with the specific clarity that arrives before thought can organize itself, that she had been wrong about one thing. Raphael hadn't known the full extent of what the connection meant. She could see it in his face, not the controlled blankness of a caught man, but the ashen, wide-eyed expression of someone who had just been shown a drawing of a room they thought they'd built and discovered it had a door they never knew was there. He hadn't chosen this location as a trap. He had chosen it as a safe house. And someone had compromised the registration firm precisely because it was the firm Raphael used for safe properties, which meant someone had been inside Raphael's operational structure for 14 months, learning which properties were clean, which titles were private, which locations would be chosen in exactly this kind of emergency. Bellicorte hadn't followed them here. They were already waiting for them to arrive. She was through the kitchen door before she finished processing this completely. "We need to leave now." Both men looked at her. Now she said again, "Don't discuss it. Nico, Julian, come inside." The next 23 minutes were the longest of her life, and she lived them in very small pieces, because that was the only way to live them without losing the ability to function. Raphael was on the phone to his two men on the access road before Dario had finished telling her the shape of what he'd confirmed. Someone's inside Raphael's network, a paralegal, who had handled 3 property registrations over the past 2 years. A woman Raphael had worked with for 5 years, and vetted personally had been feeding documentation to a Bellicorte intermediary. Not actively, passively. The documents crossed her desk, and she photographed them and passed them on. And she had been doing this for 14 months, and she had not known, or had not cared, what the information would be used for. And Raphael's voice, when he said this was the voice of a man removing himself from his own body. "The road is clear," Raphael said, ending the call. "Both men are in position, nothing incoming." "Yet," Evelina said. "Yet," he agreed. She had both bags from the bedroom. The boys were dressed, and in the kitchen, she had given them no explanation, only urgency. And Julian had read her face and said nothing, and Nico had started putting his shoes on before she finished the sentence. They were efficient in emergencies, in the way that children of careful parents sometimes were, because they had learned early that when their mother's voice had a certain quality, you moved first and asked later. "Where are we going?" Nico said. "Somewhere else," she said. "How far?" "Far enough." Dario crouched in front of both of them. She watched him do it, the deliberate, careful way he brought himself down to their level. Julian looked at him with those serious eyes. Nico watched with the same watchfulness he'd been deploying since the first moment. "We're going to drive for a while," Dario said. "It's going to be boring." "I'm sorry about that. Is it dangerous?" Nico said. "Beat. It might be. I'm going to make sure it isn't." "How?" "By paying attention. Same as you would." Nico looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder and walked to the door and waited there with the patience of someone who has decided to reserve judgment. Julian tugged Dario's sleeve before standing up. "The fig tree," he said. Dario looked at him. Something moved across his face that Evelina had no category for. "We'll find another one," he said. "Promise?" A pause. "Just a breath's worth." "Then yes, I promise." She looked away. They left through the back garden, over the stone wall, through the olive trees, to a second vehicle. Raphael had stationed on a farm track behind the property. Her bag cut into her shoulder. She had Julian's hand in her right hand, and she was watching every shadow between the trees, and she was thinking at the same time about Katerina's voice, saying 14 months, and about the paralegal who had photographed documents for reasons she had not fully considered, and about how the danger had not come in a black car. It had come in the form of ordinary paperwork, moving through ordinary channels, creating a map of their safety while they slept. They reached the second vehicle. Everyone got in. Raphael pulled out onto the farm track, and the farmhouse disappeared behind the olive trees, and Evelina held Julian's hand in her lap and stared at the road ahead. Mom Julian's voice was small, not frightened. Careful. "Yes. Is this going to be okay?" She thought about every answer she could give him. The true ones, and the kind ones, and the ones that split the difference and cost the most to say. "Yes," she said, "but it's going to be hard first." He leaned against her arm, said nothing else, accepted it. Nico, on her other side, was watching the road. She didn't know what he was looking for. She thought he probably didn't know either. She thought he was learning, in real time, the same thing she had spent 5 years learning, that safety is not a place you arrive at. It is a direction you keep choosing, every morning, even when the ground underneath it turns out to be less solid than you believed. The farm track met the main road. Raphael turned north. Behind them, as they cleared the first bend, Evelina heard faintly, distantly, from the direction of the farmhouse, the sound of vehicles on the access road. Not one. Several. She did not tell the boys what the sound was. She did not have to. Dario heard it too, and turned to look at her over the seat, and in his eyes she saw the precise thing she had been trying not to see since the moment she opened her apartment door 2 days ago, that they were past the point where she could manage this alone, and past the point where he could manage it in the old ways that had caused every problem to begin with, and that, whatever came next, was going to require something neither of them had ever tried. The road curved. The sound faded. She looked forward, and she held her son's hand, and she thought, "All right. What do I actually know, and what do I do with it?" That was the question. Not whether to trust Dario. Not whether to run. Not whether the past could be renegotiated. The question was what she was actually capable of, stripped of everything that didn't matter. And she was beginning, with the particular cold clarity of someone with no remaining options, to understand that the answer to that question was more than anyone, including herself, had given her credit for. They drove for 3 hours without a destination. That was the honest truth of it. Raphael had a direction, north, which was a direction chosen because it was not south and not east, and the western option ended in ocean. But beyond that there was no plan yet. And Evelina sat in the back seat with her sons pressed against her sides, and she felt the absence of a plan, the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue, returning to it again and again, because the wrongness of the gap demanded acknowledgement. Julian had fallen asleep again. He slept the way he did everything completely, without reservation, his whole body committed to it. His head was on her lap, his backpack clutched against his chest, his breathing slow and even. She had her hand on his back, feeling that breathing, without thinking about it. Nico was not asleep. Nico was looking at the back of Dario's head, for the expression she was starting to think of as his baseline watchful, patient, recording everything. Raphael was on his second call in 30 minutes, speaking in low, rapid Italian that she followed without effort. He was trying to locate a property that had not touched his usual network. Something from a different chain entirely. He was working backward through his memory, trying to identify which of his contacts were genuinely clean and which might have brushed against the compromised paralegal at some point in the past 14 months. And she could hear in his voice that the list of certainly clean contacts was much shorter than the list of possibles. Dario had not spoken since they left the farm track. He was sitting with his elbow on the window frame and his hand against his jaw, looking at the road, and she recognized the specific quality of that silence. It was the silence of a man who had taken a piece of information and was turning it over and over, like a stone, examining every face of it. She leaned forward. Dario. He turned just enough to see her in his peripheral vision. "We need a destination in the next 20 minutes, she said. "We can't keep moving without one. It looks like flight and flight creates a pattern." "I know. Do you have anything that didn't go through Raphael's office?" A pause. "One thing. A property in the Alentejo. It's under my mother's maiden name. Raphael doesn't have the paperwork because I registered it before I met him." He said it without looking at Raphael. "I bought it when I was 23. I've never used it." Raphael glanced at him from the driver's seat. Something passed between them that was not quite an apology and not quite forgiveness. Something more complicated than either. The kind of thing that exists between men who have been through too much together to reduce the current problem to a simple betrayal narrative. "How far?" she said. 90 minutes. "Is the title genuinely clean?" "It's in my mother's name. She's been dead for 11 years. Nobody in my current organization has ever seen the documentation." She sat back. "Go there." He told Raphael the address. Raphael entered it without comment. She looked out the window at the Portuguese countryside, moving past brown and dry. In the late-season light, the occasional white farmhouse set back from the road, cork oaks stripped to rust-red bark. She thought about what Katerina had told her and what she had not yet told Dario. She had been holding one piece of information back, not strategically, simply because the sequencing of the morning had not given her the space to say it properly. She needed to say it now. "There's something else," she said. Dario turned more fully. "The Bellicorde school contract. The distribution network." She kept her voice low and even, aware of Nico beside her, who was pretending not to listen with limited success. "It wasn't surveillance targeting you. It was pre-existing infrastructure. They were already inside the school before my boys enrolled." Dario's expression didn't change in any way she could precisely identify. It was more like a slight redistribution of weight behind his eyes. "They knew you were in that area before they found you specifically. Possibly. Or the school network was built for other purposes, and my location was discovered through a different channel, and then they cross-referenced." She paused. "Either way, it means they've had access to my sons for 11 months. Legitimate contractor access. Regular, documented, unremarkable." The silence in the car changed quality. 11 months, Dario said. "Yes." He turned back to face the road. His hand moved from his jaw to the door handle, gripped it for a second, released it. She watched his knuckles go briefly pale. "I'm telling you," she said quietly, "because you need the full picture. Not because I'm assigning blame. I know why you're telling me. Do you also understand what it means strategically? That they weren't improvising. This has been a constructed approach, which means Aldo Bellicorde has been planning a move against your family, against sons he knew existed before you did, for close to a year." Another silence. Then Dario said very quietly, "He knew before I did." That's what the timeline suggests. She watched him absorb this. The particular cruelty of it, that his enemies had known his children existed, had built infrastructure around them, had been moving pieces into position, all while Dario had been staring at a 94% facial recognition match and flying to Portugal, not quite believing what he already knew. Raphael's jaw was tight. He was keeping his eyes on the road with the discipline of a man who understood that this was not his moment. Nico's small hand found her arm in the space beside Julian's sleeping head. She looked down at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was still watching the front of the car, but the hand was deliberate. She put her hand over his. They drove. The Alentejo property was smaller than the farmhouse and older. The stone walls stained dark with decades of weather, the shutters warped in their frames. The key was under a specific loose stone in the garden wall, which Dario found by touch rather than sight, which told her he had come here before alone, at some point, for reasons he hadn't mentioned. She didn't ask about those reasons. There was no running water in the rear of the house, but the main bathroom worked. There was a generator. There were tinned goods in the kitchen cupboards that were dated within the past 8 months, which meant someone had been maintaining the property in basic ways without formally involving it in any organizational structure. She filed that away. 2 of the men from the Evora perimeter had followed them in a second car. They set up outside without being told. The other men, the ones on the access road, the one who had given Raphael the all clear before the convoy left, she did not ask about, because she suspected asking would produce an answer that was not useful to focus on right now. She got the boys settled. It was midday. Julian woke up hungry and cross, the specific cross that arrived when Julian had been displaced from his routine and had not yet been given something to replace it. She found tinned tomatoes and pasta. There was pasta, which she took as a small mercy, and she cooked while Julian sat at the kitchen table and Nico explored the ground floor with the systematic thoroughness she had come to rely on as a kind of informal security sweep. Since anything that struck Nico as wrong would be reported immediately and with precision. "There's a room at the back with boxes," Nico said, returning. "Old ones or new ones?" He considered medium, not falling apart. "Stay out of it for now. I already looked inside." She closed her eyes briefly. "Of course you did. It's just papers and old clothes. Nothing interesting. Thank you for this assessment." He sat beside Julian. They had a low-grade argument about whose pasta had more sauce that resolved itself, in the way their arguments usually resolved. Julian declared victory, and Nico let him, because Nico had already identified a larger strategic objective, and wasn't going to waste energy on pasta politics. After lunch, she put Julian down for a rest. He was still tired. The morning had been draining, and he went without argument, which was how she knew he was genuinely exhausted. Nico stayed at the kitchen table with a book, or at least with the appearance of a book, or at least with consent of a book she knew from experience meant he was listening to everything happening in the adjacent room. Dario and Raphael were in the front room. She went there. They had maps on the table, not digital paper, pulled from the car. 2 of them overlapping, one showing regional road networks, and one showing something she identified after a moment as property boundaries in the Evora and Alentejo districts. Raphael had a notebook and was writing in it with the compressed urgency of someone building a new structure from scratch, because the old one couldn't be trusted. She sat. Neither man acknowledged her arrival because both of them had felt it, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. "Aldo won't wait long," Dario said. He wasn't talking to her specifically. He was thinking aloud in the way he sometimes had, structured, sequential, externalizing the logic. He had people at the farmhouse. He expected to find us there. When he finds it empty, he has 2 options: pull back and recalculate, or accelerate. "He'll accelerate," Raphael said. "Pulling back admits to his people that he missed. He can't afford that." Agreed. "So the question is how he finds us from here." "He doesn't," Dario said. "We go to him." Silence. She looked at Dario. "Say that again. Running doesn't end this. You know that. You said it yourself in Sao Aurelio, running postpones." He met her eyes. "I've been running a defensive operation since I landed in Portugal. Watching, positioning, responding. That's how we ended up in a compromised location reacting to someone else's timeline. And going to him, how does that work? You walk into Aldo Bellacorte's territory with 2 5-year-olds in a car? No. The boys don't move again until this is finished." "Finished how?" He looked at her steadily. Aldo's organization runs on his control of 3 things. His import licenses agricultural cover for the actual operations. His political contacts in Lisbon, 2 ministers who have been accepting money from him for 6 years. And his financial infrastructure, which is sophisticated, but relies on a single clearing mechanism that passes through 4 shell companies. She waited. If all 3 collapse simultaneously, he said, Aldo doesn't have an organization. He has a reputation, and reputation without structure is just a name. Collapsing his import licenses requires regulatory intervention, she said. His political contacts require exposure. His financial structure requires... She stopped. She looked at the maps on the table. She thought about Katerina's documents on her laptop, the Bellacorte subsidiaries, the transportation contracts, the school supply network. She had been looking at it as intelligence about the threat. She had not been looking at it as a weapon. His financial structure, she said slowly. The shell companies. I have documentation on 4 of his subsidiaries. My lawyer compiled it in 18 hours from public registries and cross-referencing. What kind of documentation? Ownership chains, connections between the holding company and the transportation contracts. The legal firm that showed up in the Evora registration, I now have it appearing in 3 different Bellacorte structures, which means it's a functional part of his financial infrastructure, not a coincidence. Dario was very still. That's enough to file with financial regulators. It's enough to file with financial regulators and flag to the 2 investigative journalists in Lisbon who have been reporting on political corruption for the past 3 years and would know exactly what to do with the political connection angle. She paused. I've been doing this work for 5 years. I know how these documents move and where they land and what they trigger when they get there. Raphael looked between them. The timing would need to be precise. If Aldo sees any of this coming, he pulls his political contacts first, and they bury it. Then it happens all at once, she said, simultaneously. Regulators, press, and she looked at Dario. Whatever you're planning to do about the physical side of this. Nothing that puts anyone at risk who isn't already in it, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only answers I can give you right now. That's true. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the last time she had trusted this man's word about something she couldn't fully verify. She thought about what that had cost. She thought about the farm track and the sound of vehicles on the access road, and Julian's saying, "Is this going to be okay?" in a voice that was trying very hard not to be frightened. "If anything happens that I don't know about in advance," she said, "this is over. Not the danger us. This, whatever this is. I walk with the boys the moment I find out you've kept something from me. I understand. Do you also understand that I'm not saying that to control you? I'm saying it because I cannot protect my children if I don't have accurate information. It's operational, not emotional. I know the difference," he said. "And I understand both reasons." She nodded once. "Then let's build this." They worked for 4 hours. She had not sat at a table working alongside Dario in 5 years, and the strangeness of it existed in a layer beneath the urgency, something she registered and set aside. He was sharp. He had always been sharp. It was one of the things she had loved about him, before she understood what that sharpness had been applied to. And it was one of the things that made her angriest now, that the intelligence she had admired had been used for years in service of a world she had eventually had to flee. But right now, that intelligence was being applied to dismantling Aldo Bellacorte, and she was applying hers alongside it, and the combination was more effective than either alone. And she was aware of that, and she refused to make it mean more than the immediate situation required. Katerina joined by phone, then by a secure video connection that Raphael set up with a competence she didn't question. Katerina had already been in contact with one of the Lisbon journalists, not revealing the full picture, just establishing a channel. She had the financial documentation organized into 3 packages, each one sufficient on its own, collectively devastating. The regulatory filing needs to go to 2 agencies simultaneously, Evelina said. The financial authority and the competition regulator. Different enough that neither one can refer it to the other and sit on it. I can file tonight, Katerina said. Electronic submission timestamped. What's the journalist timeline? Dario said. She can run with it in 24 hours if she has the political connection documents, Katerina said. She's been building toward the ministerial angle for 8 months. We'd be handing her the piece she's been missing. 24 hours from now is tomorrow evening, Raphael said. Which means Aldo has tonight, Dario said. Everyone understood what that meant. Tonight was the window. Aldo's people had found the farmhouse empty. They were recalculating, and the moment they found the trail again, the window closed. Which meant the financial and legal assault needed to be filed and in motion before dawn. And whatever Dario was planning for the physical infrastructure of Bellacorte's operation needed to happen in the same window. The convoy trap, Evelina said. Dario looked at her. From what you've described, Aldo expects you to be protecting the boys by moving them. He's been tracking movement. If he believes we're moving the boys tonight, A false route, Raphael said. He sat forward. If the compromised network still has access to our communications, which it does, because we haven't shut it down publicly, we can leak an itinerary. Through the paralegal, Dario said. I can make it look like an internal communication she would have access to, Raphael said. A transfer route, specific timing, specific vehicle description. He paused. His people hit an empty convoy, and we have them. And Aldo himself, she said. Aldo gives orders from a remove, Dario said. If his convoy is intercepted, his operation publicly collapsed by regulators. And press in the same 18-hour window, his political cover gone he surfaces. Because the people under him start making decisions about whether loyalty to a sinking structure is worth what it costs. She absorbed this. It was sound. It was more than sound, it was the kind of construction she had spent 5 years recognizing in legal documents, the way a careful architecture of pressure, applied from multiple directions, simultaneously produced an outcome that no single pressure point could achieve alone. She also knew it required perfect sequencing and a complete absence of the kind of leak that had compromised the Evora property. Paralegal, she said. She needs to receive the false itinerary from a source she trusts, which means it has to come through Raphael's normal channels. Yes, Raphael said, which means you need to continue operating as though the network is intact while actively using its compromised state against Bellacourt. Yes. And she can't know that you know. No. She looked at Raphael for a moment. He met her gaze with the same tired directness. He had always had no performance, no posturing. Just a man looking at the damage his trust had caused and deciding what to do with the remaining pieces. Can you do that? She said. Reach out to someone who has been feeding your operational intelligence to your enemy, and act as though nothing has changed. He was quiet for a second. I've done harder things. She believed him. She was not sure she liked what that meant about the world, but she believed him. All right, she said. Katerina files at midnight. The journalist receives the political documents at the same time with an embargo until 6 A. M. Raphael sends the false itinerary through normal channels tonight, at 10 early enough that it reaches Aldo's people with time to mobilize, late enough that they can't fully verify it. She looked at Dario. And you tell me now, plainly what you're doing about the physical operation. No omissions. Dario looked at her across the table. He told her. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She thought about the version of Dario she had known 5 years ago, who would have solved the same problem through a very different mechanism and would not have explained himself to anyone. She thought about what was different now. Okay, she said. She told the boys at 7 in the evening. Not everything. Enough. She sat on the edge of Julian's makeshift bed, and Nico sat beside her, and she said, tonight they were going to stay here, all night, and tomorrow things were going to be different. And she needed them to stay in the back room with Raphael, and not come out unless she or Dario came to get them. Julian processed this by asking if there were more tinned tomatoes. Nico said, Are you going to be in the front part of the house? Yes. With him? Yes. Nico looked at the floor. He had his toy car in his hands, the same one from Sao Aurelio. She noticed, which meant he had packed it first, which told her something about what he considered essential. Will you tell us if something bad happens? I'll tell you everything I can, when I can. It's not a yes. No, it isn't. She put her hand on his shoulder. But it's honest. He nodded. She kissed them both. Julian was already asking Raphael about the boxes in the back room. Nico sat with his car in his hands and watched her walk to the door, with the expression she had come to think of as his working face processing, storing, not yet concluding. She went to the front room. Dario was standing at the window, looking out at the dark garden. He had a phone in his hand, not his usual one, something Raphael had provided. The light from the window made the planes of his face look harder than they were. Or maybe they were exactly as hard as they looked. She had spent 5 years trying to remember him accurately, and she still wasn't sure she had it right. Raphael's sending the message in 40 minutes, he said without turning. I know. Katerina's ready? Yes, he turned. He looked at her with something that was not quite the thing she'd been refusing to name for the past 3 days, but was standing close enough to it that she needed to make a decision about how much space to give it. "Evelina, don't," she said. "I'm not going to say anything you need to protect yourself from. You don't know what I need to protect myself from." He fit that. He looked at her for a moment longer, then back out the window. "This doesn't work," he said. "It's going to work." "But if it doesn't, Dario," she said it with enough weight that he stopped. "It's going to work, because we built it correctly, and because you know what you're doing out there, and because I know what I'm doing in here. And the one advantage we have over Aldo Bellacorte is that he is operating on the assumption that the two of us are separate problems." She paused. "We're not separate problems." He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them said anything about what that meant. They had built something in the last 4 hours at that kitchen table that had nothing to do with the past and nothing to do with whatever the future might eventually require. It was something present, tense and functional and real, and she was not going to contaminate it by turning it into a conversation about feelings while her sons were in the back room and Aldo Bellacorte's people were recalculating 40 kilometers away. At 10 o'clock exactly, Raphael sent the message. At 10:17, Katerina confirmed the regulatory filings were submitted. At 10:31, the journalist acknowledged receipt of the political documents with a single word, "understood." Then they waited. The house was very quiet. The generator hummed. Outside, somewhere beyond the dark garden, 2 men she barely knew stood watch in the cold. In the back room, her sons were presumably asleep, or at least pretending to be, which with Julian was the same thing and with Nico was a meaningful distinction. Dario sat across from her at the kitchen table. Neither of them spoke. The maps were still spread out between them. The phone in Dario's hand was dark. At 11:43 it lit up. He looked at it. "Read the message." His face did not change, but something behind it did a settling, a shift in weight. The thing that happens when information arrives that confirms a calculation, and the confirmation is both a relief and the beginning of something difficult. "They took it," he said. She breathed. 3 vehicles on the false route. "Our people have them." He looked up. "I'll put everything he had into this." He didn't hold back because he thought he had us. He thought he had the boys. Yes. She put her hands flat on the table. Her heart was going at a rate she did not bother monitoring, because monitoring it would not help anything. "What happens now?" Now he stopped. His phone lit up again. He read it. Read it again. Then he set the phone on the table face up so she could see the screen. She read the message from Raphael. She read it twice. The cold that moved through her was different from any previous cold. This one was not fear. It was not even shock, exactly. It was the specific sensation of a variable she had not included in the calculations suddenly smuffed with complete authority. The message said, "Aldo isn't with the convoy. He's not in Lisbon either. His car left the city at 9 p.m. direction, south." Her eyes went to Dario's face. He was already standing. "The boys," she said. She was moving before she finished the word, through the kitchen door, down the hall, her hand hitting the back room door and pushing it open hard enough that it bounced off the wall. And the light from the hall fell across the back room floor, and she counted automatically 2 figures, 2 backpacks. The shape of Julian on his side, and Nico sitting up with his car already in his hand, because Nico always heard her coming before she arrived. Both of them were there. She stood in the doorway breathing. Raphael appeared at her shoulder. "He's not coming here," he said. "He doesn't know this location, but he's moving." "Where is he going?" Dario said. "We don't know yet, then find out." Dario's voice had dropped to something that was barely above a whisper and was more frightening for it. "Right now, Raphael. Find out where he is going." Nico looked at her from his makeshift bed with the car in his hands and said, with a particular precision that made him both exhausting and extraordinary, "Mom." Something went wrong. She looked at her son. She thought about 14 months of a contract she hadn't known about. She thought about a paralegal who had photographed documents out of indifference or desperation or simple poor terrible greed, and how ordinary the mechanism of disaster always turned out to be when you found it at the center of the wreckage. She thought about Aldo Bellacorte in a car heading south at 9 o'clock while his three-vehicle decoy convoy rolled toward an interception on a route he had never intended to be on himself. He had sent to the convoy as the distraction, and they had sent him a message that told him exactly where the real target was. Not in a moving car on a false route, sitting still, waiting to see if their plan had worked. She met Nico's eyes, and she said the only thing she could say that was both true and survivable. Yes, but we're going to fix it. Dario was already on the phone. Outside in the dark garden, one of the two men who had been standing watch knocked twice on the back door, the agreed signal, the one that meant something had changed, and then the knock. The knock came 3 times, not 2. Raphael had established the signals 2 hours earlier. 2 knocks meant movement in the perimeter, something to note. 3 knocks meant immediate threat, something to act on. She had registered this information the way she registered everything: operational, filed, indexed, ready. 3 knocks. She turned to Nico and Julian, and she said, with the specific quality of voice she had developed over 5 years of being the only adult in the room, under the bed, "Both of you. Now." Julian was moving before she finished the sentence, because Julian, for all his easy warmth, had understood since the car that this was not a holiday. Nico moved too, but paused at the last second to press his toy car into her hand. She looked down at it, then at him. "For luck," he said, and went under the bed. She closed the back room door and moved down the hall. Dario was already at the front window, standing to the side of it, not in front of it. Raphael was by the interior wall, phone pressed to his ear, face angled towards the ceiling in the way people angle when they are trying to hear something critical over ambient noise. The 2 men from outside had come in through the back. She had heard the garden door, that specific creak, and they were in the kitchen now, positioned without being told, professionals in the way that reminded her uncomfortably of exactly what world she had re-entered. She came to stand beside Dario. "How many?" she said quietly. 1 vehicle confirmed, possibly 2. He didn't look at her. He was watching something in the dark outside. She couldn't see what. The garden was a mass of shadows, but he had found a shape out there that his eyes had locked onto. He came himself. "You're certain?" Raphael's man on the road got a visual before they went dark. A pause. "It's Aldo." She absorbed this. Aldo Bellacorte, who had spent 14 months building infrastructure around her sons. Aldo Bellacorte, who had sent a 3-vehicle decoy convoy, because he had read Dario's defensive posture correctly and understood that protecting the boys was the emotional priority, and had exploited exactly that. Aldo Bellacorte, who was now in the dark outside a stone farmhouse in the Alentejo, because the information he had received about their location had been so specific, so internally consistent, that he had decided to come himself rather than trust the operation to someone else. That last part was the part she had not planned. She had planned for soldiers. She had not specifically accounted for a principal. "He thinks this ends tonight," she said. "Yes, he's right." Dario looked at her then. Brief. Something in the look that she would think about later, when there was space to think. Raphael lowered his phone. 3 men with him. Possibly 4. "My man lost visual at the tree line." He said it without apology or drama, just information, which was what she needed from him and what she was beginning to understand he had always been best at. "They're coming around the east side, away from the road." "Away from the road," she said, "means they're not planning to leave quickly." She thought about the stone wall on the east side, the one she had seen from the back garden that first morning. The wall is low on the northeast corner. There's a gap where the stones collapsed. She stopped. "Wrong farmhouse. Wrong country. There's a gap in the northeast corner of the wall," Raphael said, because he had done his own survey, and he didn't need her to know the property to confirm it. "They'll come through there." "Then that's where we want them," she said. Both men looked at her. She thought about Katerina's documents. The regulatory filings, submitted at midnight, time-stamped and irrevocable, sitting in 2 government inboxes. The journalist, awake in Lisbon with a political corruption story that was going to make her career, waiting on an embargo that lifted in. She checked the time: 4 hours and 12 minutes. The convoy, intercepted on the false-out route, 3 vehicles full of Bellacorte soldiers who had been moved off the board. Aldo had come here with 3 or 4 men. She had two on the inside. Two had come through the back garden, and Dario. He doesn't know we know he's coming, she said. He thinks we're watching the road. Yes, Raphael said. Then he comes through the northeast gap, expecting to approach from an unmonitored angle. She pressed Nico's toy car in her palm, the small, hard shape of it. Let him. A silence. Then Dario said, you want to let them inside the wall. I want them positioned where your men are already standing. She looked at Raphael. The two who came through the garden, they're on the east side? Yes. Then Aldo comes to them, rather than your men moving toward Aldo. Nobody is exposed on open ground. She paused, and you need something from him. Something that ends this properly. Dario understood immediately. She could see it happen, the shift in his face, when the operational picture completed itself. Conversation. On record, she said. Katerina's contact at the regulatory authority needs corroboration for certain elements of the financial filing. A man who believes he is about to win tends to speak with more candor than is strategically advisable. Raphael looked at Dario. Something passed between them that was the residue of a long friendship being carefully, painfully rebuilt in real time. Then Raphael reached into his coat and produced a small device, matte black, the size of a lighter, and set it on the windowsill. Already recording, he said. She had not known that. She looked at him. I've been running it since we arrived, he said. Everything that might matter. A pause that contained more than a pause usually did. I should have done a lot of things sooner. This is what I can do now. She nodded. Aldo Bellacorte came through the northeast gap at 12:41 in the morning. She knew the exact time because she was watching the clock on her phone in the hallway, positioned exactly where she could see both the back room door and the edge of the kitchen. And she had been measuring minutes with the focused attention of someone who understands that timing is the only variable still within their control. She heard it rather than saw it, a scuff of stone, a footstep on the garden path, the particular silence of men trying to be quiet, which is always louder than men who simply are. Then one of Raphael's men said something in Italian, and a different voice answered, and the exchange lasted approximately 4 seconds before it became clear to Aldo that the unmonitored angle had been monitored after all. She heard Aldo's voice clearly. She had no visual, but the voice traveled through the old stone house with the fidelity of a space designed, centuries ago, to carry sound. He was not a loud man. He didn't need to be. His voice had the particular register of someone who had been giving instructions for a long time and expected them to land without amplification. Where is he? Aldo said. Here, Dario said. A door opened and closed, and she was left as in the hallway with the clock on her phone and the back room door and Nico's toy car in her hand. She stood there for 11 minutes. She counted everyone. She heard fragments. Not complete sentences, the stone walls carried tone more faithfully than words, and she had the blood pressure of someone who has been managing an emergency for 4 hours and is standing just outside the final resolution of it. She heard Aldo's voice, controlled, the occasional word surfacing clearly, territory, arrangement, cost. She heard Dario's voice underneath it, steadier, less frequent, the voice of someone who has decided to listen rather than respond, because listening is how you let the other person tell you more than they intend to. Then she heard Aldo say, clearly, with the specific contempt of a man who believes he is addressing someone who has run out of moves, your children are a liability you created. Not my problem. My problem is that you've had something I want for 3 years, and sentiment has been getting in your way. A pause. This is the simplest solution. She heard Dario say, tell me what you want. Say it completely. And Aldo did. She heard it. The recording caught it. She stood in the hallway of a stone farmhouse in the Alentejo with a dead woman's property title protecting her sons, and she listened to a man describe, with the calm of someone explaining a business arrangement, what he had intended to do with 2 5-year-old children as leverage, and what he intended to do with Dario when the leverage had served its purpose. Then Dario said, thank you. Aldo's voice changed register. For what? For being thorough. A silence. Then Raphael's voice, and the sounds of a situation being brought to conclusion without the kind of violence that would leave evidence requiring explanation, and then quiet. She went to the back room door. She opened it. "Okay," she said into the dark. "It's over." Julian emerged immediately, as if he had been waiting at the edge of the space rather than in the middle of it. He came into the hall and wrapped both arms around her waist with the total physical commitment that was entirely Julian, and she put her hand on the back of his head and held him. Nico came out more slowly. He looked at her face with the same assessment he had been running since the first morning in Sao Aurelio, reading her the way she had read Dario for 4 years, looking for the truth underneath the controlled exterior. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. He nodded. Then he held out his hand for his car, and she gave it back to him, and he put it in his pocket without ceremony. The arrest came at 6:18 a.m. 2 officers from the National Authority, accompanied by a financial investigator whose name appeared on the regulatory filing that had been sitting in a government inbox since midnight. Aldo Bellacorte, who had by that point spent 6 hours in a secured position that was neither comfortable nor dangerous, was transferred to their custody with the particular bureaucratic tidiness that follows when the paperwork has been done correctly in advance. His 3 remaining men were taken separately, in the dark, with a minimum of noise. The journalist's piece went live at 6:18 minutes before the arrest, which meant that by the time Aldo was sitting in the back of an official vehicle, the first wave of his political contacts were already managing their own exposure, and had stopped answering his calls. The second wave of financial reporting came from the regulatory submissions, picked up by a financial desk in Lisbon, who had been watching the Bellacourt structure for their own reasons, and recognized immediately what the filing represented. By 8 in the morning, 3 separate banks had frozen accounts connected to the shell company network. By noon, 2 sitting ministers had issued statements of varying degrees of self-exculpation that were, in the particular way of political self-exculpation, sufficiently detailed to constitute admissions. Evelina sat in the kitchen of the stone farmhouse and read all of this on her phone, while Nico ate bread with olive oil at the table, and Julian slept for 2 more hours in the back room, recovering from a night that he would remember differently at different ages as he grew into the person he was going to be. Raphael was outside, on the phone, managing the aftermath of the convoy interception and the logistics of Aldo's transfer, and a dozen other threads she didn't need to hold, because he was holding them. She was aware that Raphael holding things was a complicated fact right now, that the breach of his network had happened through his trust, that he was operating under a weight of responsibility that he would carry for a long time, probably forever, in the particular way that men like Raphael carried things. She was also aware that he was holding them correctly, and that correctness was what the situation required. Dario came inside at 7. He looked like a man who had been awake for 30 hours, which was accurate, and like a man who had been in a room with Aldo Bellacorte, which produced its own kind of residue. Not physical. Something else. The quality that settles on people who have been in close proximity to a specific kind of ugliness and have decided not to become part of it. He sat down across from Nico. Nico looked at him over his bread. "Is it finished?" Nico said. "Yes. What happened to the man?" "He's been arrested. He'll go to trial." Nico considered this with the careful attention he gave to structural questions. "He won't come back?" "No." Nico tore a piece of bread. "Okay," he ate it. "Then were you scared?" Dario looked at him. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window now, thin and clean. The particular quality of early light in a place where the air hasn't been complicated yet by the day. It made everything look slightly more honest than usual. "Yes," Dario said. "Of him?" He said it, simply. "No performance. Of losing your mother. Of this being the night I couldn't fix what I broke." Nico chewed his bread, thought. "But you did fix it." "We fixed it," Dario said. "Your mother fixed most of it." Nico looked toward the hallway where Evelina was still sitting at the other end of the kitchen, phone in hand. Then back at Dario. "She's really smart." "Yes, you should probably not forget that." Dario looked at the table for a moment. Something in his face shifted into a territory she recognized as the edge of something genuine and uncontrolled, and he controlled it, but just barely. "I won't," he said. Nico nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to his bread. She called Katerina at 8. Katerina had been awake all night and sounded it, but underneath the exhaustion there was the specific energy of someone who has watched something they built do exactly what it was designed to do. The financial authority called it 740, she said. They want supplementary documentation. I told them it would be 3 business days. Give them 2, Evelina said. I told them 3 because 2 is what we can actually do. Good. The journalist wants a follow-up. Background only, no attribution. Set it up for next week. I need a few days before I'm useful to anyone professionally. Pause. Evelina, are you all right? She looked at the kitchen. Nico finishing his bread. The morning light through the window. The sound of Julian beginning to wake in the back room. A soft, indistinct sound that she had learned to identify across the full spectrum of his moods, and which currently read as confused but not as stressed. I will be, she said. It was the most honest answer she had. That's enough, Katerina said. She ended the call and sat with the phone in her lap, and she thought about what came next. Not the logistics were manageable. There was a sequence of things that needed to happen in a specific order, and she could see the sequence clearly, and she would move through it. She thought about the shape of the thing after the sequence. After the regulatory process, and the trial, and the professional work of rebuilding her client network from whatever temporary disruption the past week had caused. After Sao Aurelio and the apartment she had made into something real, and would probably not return to, for practical reasons that had nothing to do with failure. After all of that, she thought about what she was going to do with the fact that she had sat at a kitchen table last night with Dario Vescari and built something in 4 hours that was more honest and more effective than most things she had built alone, and that this fact sat in her chest, now without the protective anger she had been using to keep it at a manageable distance. The anger was still there. She was not pretending otherwise. 5 years, and a betrayal of that specific quality did not resolve in a night because the night had gone well. She was not that naive, and had not been since she was 29 years old, standing in a doorway with a ring on her finger, counting 4 seconds. But she also understood something she had been refusing to look at directly since the moment she opened her apartment door in Sao Aurelio and saw him standing between her and 2 men who meant harm. She had survived without him. That was true. She had built something real without him. That was also true. And the woman who had survived and built was standing here this morning, capable of choosing what came next without needing anything from anyone, which was exactly what she had spent 5 years trying to become. Which meant that whatever she chose now, she chose as herself. Not as a woman, running from something or toward something or operating out of fear or obligation. Free choice, she understood finally, was only possible when you had genuinely become someone who did not need the choice to go a particular way. She was that person now. She went to find Dario. He was on the terrace at the back of the house. She had not noticed the terrace in the dark, a small stone ledge with a low wall, more of an afterthought than a feature, looking out over the dry Alentejo landscape. Olive trees, red earth, a sky that was doing the specific thing morning skies do when the night before has been very long. He heard her come out, and he didn't turn immediately. She stood beside him, and they looked at the landscape for a moment without speaking, which was something they had always been able to do, and which she had forgotten and was now remembering, with the specific quality of remembering something you'd told yourself you were better off without. What happens to the paralegal, she said. Not because it was the most important thing, because it was a question she could start with. Raphael is handling it. She'll be interviewed by the authority. Her documentation is part of the evidence chain. He paused. I don't know her reasons. Raphael doesn't either, completely. It doesn't change what she did. No, she agreed. Silence. Sabina called me, he said, 6 weeks after you left. She wanted to. I don't know what she wanted. I didn't let her finish. He looked at the olive trees. I told her what she had done, not what I had done. What she had done to you specifically. I think she expected me to be angry in a way she could manage. I wasn't. Evelina said nothing. Her family cut contact with me within the week. I didn't pursue it. A pause. I need you to know that I didn't look for you immediately because I thought you would come back when you were ready. I was wrong about that for about 3 months, before I understood that you weren't coming back, And by then, I had spent those 3 months being wrong in ways that cost us both time. I will never be able to return to you. She looked at the side of his face, the line of his jaw. Scar on his hand she hadn't asked about. The scar, she said. He looked down at his left hand. A conversation that went badly about 2 years ago. Not a dramatic story. Good. I'm tired of dramatic stories. He almost smiled. Evelina. I know, she said. I'm not asking you. I know what you're not asking. She turned to face him. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without saying anything, until I'm finished. He turned to face her. I am not the person I was when I left, she said. That woman had never been alone. She had never paid rent she was worried about making. She had never been in a hospital room by herself at 3 a.m. with 2 premature babies who were healthy but early. And she had never been the only one there, and she had never had to be enough because there was no one else. She held his gaze. The person who is standing here made herself. Not from nothing I had skills. I had education. I had money. But the particular person I am now is something I built in the years I was gone, and I am not willing to unbuild her for anyone. Not even for a version of this I might want. He said nothing. He had promised he would say nothing. What I want, she said, and what I am willing to build toward those are 2 different things. What I want, I've known for longer than I've been willing to admit. What I am willing to build toward depends entirely on who you are in the ordinary days. Not in a farmhouse at midnight. Anyone can be useful in a crisis. I need to know who you are on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing is happening and the boys need help with something boring, and the answer is not impressive or heroic, but just present. He was watching her with absolute attention. So here is what I'm offering, she said. Not a return to what we were, not forgiveness as a destination you've arrived at. A beginning, real one, slow, with the understanding that I will end it without hesitation if I see the man you were, instead of the man you're claiming to have become. He was quiet for a moment. The morning held them both in its particular stillness. I understand every condition, he said. I accept everyone. You haven't heard them all yet. I understand that too. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the landscape. He turned with her, and they stood side by side looking at the red earth and the olive trees and the widening sky. We'll go back to Rome, she said. My terms. My rooms. My finances, completely separate. My firm continues under my name from wherever I set it up. Yes, the boys' school is my decision. Their routines are my decision. You participate in those decisions as a father, but you do not override them. Agreed in Dario. She glanced at him. If you ever, in any way, at any level of degree, in any circumstance, if you ever do to me again what you did 5 years ago. Not the specific act, the specific quality of it. The decision to choose something that destroys what we have without telling me we have a problem first. I know. Say it. He looked at her. That's the one thing I cannot give you a condition for. The only thing I can give you is the truth that I have not had a single day in 5 years that didn't cost me something because of what I chose, and that what I am now is made at least partly from that cost. He paused. I cannot promise you I will never fail you again. I can tell you that I am a different kind of man than I was, and that the difference was expensive, and that I intend to spend whatever time you give me proving it. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked away. That's an honest answer, she said. It's the only kind I have left. Julian woke up hungry, loud, and immediately interested in whether the fig tree situation had been resolved. Evelina was back in the kitchen when he appeared in the doorway, hair disordered, still in the clothes he'd slept in. Backpack somehow on, despite not going anywhere, and she turned from the stove and looked at him and felt the specific thing she felt every morning when she saw him, which she had no word for in any of the 4 languages she worked in and had stopped trying to name. Good morning, she said. Is there food? There's eggs. Are they good eggs? They're eggs, Julian. He came into the kitchen and sat beside Nico, who had found a piece of paper somewhere and was drawing something on it with focused intensity. Julian looked at the drawing and immediately had opinions. Nico had opinions about his opinions. The argument was engaged within 40 seconds of Julian's sitting down. Dario came inside. He stopped at the kitchen doorway and looked at the 2 of them arguing about the drawing. He looked at it for a long moment. Just looked the way a person looks at something they have needed and not had for a very long time. Something in the quality of the looking was private enough that Evelina turned back to the stove to give him that privacy. "Dad," Julian said, without looking up from the argument. Dario went still. "Not the man or him. Dad," said in exactly the same casual, automatic tone that Julian said everything without ceremony, without significance, as if it were simply the word that fit the slot. Evelina kept her eyes on the eggs. Nico said, also without looking up, "Don't ask him to settle it. He'll just say we're both right." "That's fair," Dario said. His voice was completely level, and she did not look at his face. He sat at the table. She put eggs in front of everyone, including him, and she sat down and they ate breakfast in the kitchen of a dead woman's farmhouse in the Alentejo on a morning that had followed the worst night of the last 5 years. And it was ordinary and imperfect and occasionally loud. And Julian spilled his water, and Nico told him statistically he spilled something at almost every meal. And Julian said that wasn't a statistic, that was an opinion. And Dario quietly moved his plate out of range of the spreading water without being asked, and nobody said anything significant. It was the most honest thing that had happened in weeks. 3 months later, Rome. The apartment she had chosen was in Prati, not inside the estate, not adjacent to it. A separate building, 10 minutes by car, chosen for the light through its south-facing windows and the proximity to a school she had visited 3 times before enrolling Nico and Julian. Her firm operated from the second bedroom, which she had converted into an office, and the work had recovered faster than she had expected because competence, she had learned, was more durable than circumstance. She had her own key to the estate. She used it when she chose to, which was not every day, which was the point. Dario came to the apartment for dinner on Tuesday evenings and Sunday mornings. He was always on time, which she had not known to be true of him, and which she suspected was new. He helped with homework, without being asked, and without taking over. He learned which twin hated tomatoes Julian, always Julian, and which one secretly counted lightning between some storms, because he was afraid of the gap between the flash and the sound, and he never made Nico feel watched when he did it, which was the right instinct, and she had not had to tell him. He lost football matches to them at the park, and she watched from a bench. She saw the exact moment Nico caught him losing deliberately and went still and said nothing for the rest of the game. And then, walking home, pulled on Dario's sleeve and said, "You should play properly." Dario had looked at him. "Why?" "Because I want to actually beat you. Not your pretend version." A pause. "That's going to take you a few more years." "I know," Nico said. "That's fine. I'm patient." She walked behind them on the footpath home, and she thought about 5 years ago, and she thought about a smile through a doorway, and she thought about a bathroom in Lisbon, and a bus crossing a border in the darks, and 2 small early arrivals who had changed the shape of everything, and she thought about who she had been when she left and who she was now, and the distance between those 2 people was not a wound anymore. It was just the road she had walked. One evening in November, after the boys were asleep, and the apartment was quiet, Dario sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same position they had occupied in the Alentejo farmhouse, building something out of urgency, and he put a small envelope on the table. She looked at it. "Open it or don't," he said. "There's no wrong answer." She opened it. It was a document. Legal, clean, formally structured. The restructuring of the Vescari holdings, completed through an independent firm she recognized as having no connection to anything she would need to distrust. Legitimate companies in independent management. Financial separation clearly delineated. Independent trusts for Nico and Julian that she had legal oversight of. And at the bottom of the document, a single page that was not a financial instrument. A letter. Short. His handwriting, which she had not seen in 5 years, which was the same as she remembered, and which her body recognized before her brain finished processing it. It said, "I am not asking for anything tonight. This is the proof. I said I would build, and I have built it. What you do with it is entirely your decision. I will not ask again." She put the letter on the table. She looked at it. She thought about the ring she had once slid under a door. She thought about what it had meant then, and what putting it down had meant, and what every subsequent choice had built. "There's no ring," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't bring a ring." "Why not?" "Because a ring is something you give someone to seal an agreement." "I don't want to seal an agreement." He looked at her across the table. "I want to know what you want, not what makes sense. Not what protects the boys because the boys are already protected. What you actually want." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Rome she had once fled and then returned to, on her own terms, moved through its November evening, with its noise and its history and its complete indifference to the private reckoning happening in an apartment in Prati. She thought about what she wanted. She had spent 5 years learning to ask that question without flinching. She was not going to stop asking it now. "I want Tuesday evenings and Sunday mornings to be more than visits," she said. He was very still. "I want the boys to wake up in the same place as their father. Not because biology requires it. Because they have both, in their own separate ways, started wanting that, and they don't know how to ask me for it." She paused. "And I want it. Which is the part I had to be sure about before I said it." "Are you sure?" She looked at him. "I've been sure for longer than I've been willing to say. I was waiting until the being sure felt like a choice and not a concession. And now? And now it feels like a choice." He reached across the table, slowly, and put his hand over hers. She looked down at their hands, then back at him. "No ring," she said. "No ring. And if you—" "I know," he said. "You have already told me, and I have already heard you, and I am not going to pretend the warning isn't standing." "Good." She turned her hand over under his, held it. "Then yes. The boys found out on a Sunday morning. Not through an announcement. Simply because on Sunday morning, Dario was there when they woke up, and the Sunday after that, and the Sunday after that, and at some point, Julian stopped registering it as notable, and Nico stopped watching for the ending of it. And the shape of the mornings changed the way shapes change when a missing piece is put back, not complete, not perfect, but balanced in a way it hadn't been. On a Sunday in December early, before the city was fully awake, Evelina sat on the small balcony off the apartment kitchen with a coffee she'd made in the dark because she still woke early and probably always would. The street below was empty. The sky was doing the thing it sometimes did in Rome. In winter, a specific gray that was not flat but layered, the kind of gray that contains color inside it if you look long enough. She heard the apartment door open behind her, then the sliding door, then Nico's voice. "Sleep? Not fully committed to being awake? What are you doing?" "Thinking," she said. He came and stood beside her at the balcony railing. He was wearing the oversized sweater he had adopted from a peg in the hallway, and which was almost certainly Dario's, and which she had not mentioned. He looked at the street the same way she was looking at it, not at anything specifically, just at the morning being what it was. "Mom, are we staying?" She looked at the gray sky layered with its hidden colors. She thought about Sao Aurelio and the apartment she had made from nothing, and the bakery across the street, and the school with the gate she had walked through 200 mornings. She thought about the woman who had walked away from an estate in Rome before sunrise with a ring in her coat pocket and the specific quality of silence that surrounded a decision you cannot undo. She thought about the gate, not the one she had fled through. The one that was now, on the relevant evenings and mornings, standing open. "Yes," she said, "we're staying." Nico leaned against her arm. He said nothing else. He had his car in his pocket. In his pocket, she could see the shape of it through the sweater, and he stood there on the December balcony with the weight of him warm against her side. And after a moment, he reached out and found her hand the way Julian reached for things, completely and without hesitation, and she held it. Inside, she heard Julian wake up. The specific sound of Julian waking, a series of sounds in rapid succession, none of them quiet, followed by Dario's voice, saying something she couldn't make out through the glass door. Julian's voice back, already engaged, already into whatever had occurred to him first. Dario's voice again, patient. She stood on the balcony and listened to the ordinary sounds of a morning she had not known to want until she had spent 5 years building herself into someone who could choose it freely, and she thought, this is it. Not the climax, not the resolution, just the thing that comes after survival when you have survived correctly. The gray sky held its color inside it without showing it. She was not in a hurry for it to reveal itself, She had learned, more than anything else, how to wait for things to become what they actually were. The morning opened. She stayed. Fade out.